The Imperial Red Royal Guards, Emperor Palpatine's elite protection force, are some of the most highly trained and dangerous professionals within the ranks of the entire Empire, tasked with protecting the Emperor himself and preserving the livelihood of his regime. These Imperial Guards are some of the most important individuals for the safety, security, and prosperity of Palpatine's new Empire. These Red Guards work more closely with Palpatine than Imperial officers, and they are privy to some of the most sensitive Imperial information known to both Palpatine and Vader. They are some of Palpatine's most trusted individuals among the entirety of the ranks of the Empire, and are bound by an unbreakable loyalty. So why then did Lord Vader so heavily despise these Red Guards? Why did Palpatine's most trusted battalion of highly elite guards and his right-hand man develop such a contempt for one another despite both serving the same Emperor and pursuing largely the same goals? After all, they both wished to better the state of the Empire, ensure that the Emperor was protected from any known threat. Well, today, students of the Force, let's explore that question and answer why Darth Vader disliked the Imperial Guards so much. Much like Vader himself, the Guards existed outside of many of the traditional Imperial hierarchy that was established, and did not in fact have an official rank within the Empire. This meant that unlike the rest of the Imperial Armada, Vader had no jurisdiction to command these guards, and it was very rare that any guard would submit to Vader's will. On the principle of solely serving the Emperor, they answered to one individual, that always being Palpatine himself, same as Vader, regardless of what Vader himself wanted or needed at any given moment in time. They served one undying purpose, and one purpose only, that being the safety and security of the Emperor. And this underlying goal meant that they could seldom be swayed into doing anything else. In addition to this, they did not only show underlying loyalty to his master, but they actively chose Palpatine over Vader, which meant that the guards that protected Vader on any occasion were not actually completely loyal to him at all, and were only serving to protect Vader because the Emperor commanded them to. On several occasions, they actually stifled many of Darth Vader's plans to finally break free from his master's grip. Despite being the lifeblood of the Empire and exerting their complete dominion over the galaxy, Darth Sidious and Darth Vader were still Sith Lords, and they had practices that went beyond political motivations. Conquest is a common goal for Sith, and several Sith Lords have exerted varying levels of dominance over the reaches of the galaxy. But even though this particular duo of Sith Lords had succeeded, and even though their empire was prospering, they were still bound by the ancient Sith traditions that ensured the survival of the Sith. We are of course referring to the Rule of Two, which was enacted by Darth Bane in order to not only ensure the survival of the Sith, but guarantee that they continued to get more powerful as the years went on, meaning that even though Vader and Palpatine worked incredibly closely together, they were constantly locked in a power struggle with one another as the Rule of Two dictated. And the Red Royal Guards were an inherent advantage that Palpatine had completely in his favor. The rule was established after the Sith Council continued to routinely butcher themselves, as their members were subject to infighting and a constant struggle for dominion over one another. And one of the ramifications meant that each Sith would be doomed to overthrow their master once they became powerful enough, and Darth Vader was no different. Nor was he different in his aspirations to overthrow Sidious. Even though they had achieved their goal, this particular Sith practice had to follow, and this could only happen if one of them were to eventually die. Either Palpatine would find a stronger apprentice to replace Vader, or Vader would overthrow his master and take on an apprentice of his own, in order to inherit the title of the Sith Emperor, which is notably different from the title of Galactic Emperor. This meant that on several occasions, Vader began to formulate plans to overthrow Palpatine, as it was not only his desire, but his responsibility to the traditions of the Sith. He spent several years attempting to figure out how best to kill his master, and assumed the throne for the Sith for himself. Yet, he was never afforded the opportunity due in large part to the Imperial Guards themselves. But this is why. Part of the Red Guard's duties were to maintain constant watch over Darth Vader, and on the surface, it seemed as if this was to protect the Dark Lord on some of his more vulnerable states, including his time within his Bacta tank. But now, below the surface, they had their own sinister motives that hindered Darth Vader's ultimate freedom from the Emperor. They are constantly present, including when Vader is alone in his Bacta tank within his own chambers on Mustafar, but protecting him is only part of what they are actually doing here. The other part of their directive was to report back to the Emperor and keep him perpetually informed on everything Vader did. Every move that Vader made was reported back to Palpatine, and it was as if Vader was being constantly watched by the Emperor via these guards. This meant that he was never able to formulate or enact a plan to usurp Palpatine simply because he was never alone and was able to do so without the Emperor inevitably finding out. The royal guards being placed by Vader in the bacta tank was actually a subtle threat to Lord Vader that Palpatine was always there and was always looming. Even if he wasn't directly in the room, when Darth Vader was the weakest, Palpatine could strike at any moment. Even though Lord Vader was much more physically powerful than these guards, there was no conceivable way to eliminate them without the Emperor finding out about their deaths shortly thereafter. If he killed the guards in order to orchestrate a plan in secret, then it would only be a matter of time before Palpatine found out simply because they didn't report back to him. Not to mention, the rebels were utterly terrified of Darth Vader, and any Imperial officer would fear and respond to Darth Vader simply because they wanted to keep their lives. Even his enemies somewhat respected him for his power and control. The guards, however, were different. They were not compelled to obey him by any means, nor did they have any incentive to betray their true master, as they couldn't be swayed, bought, or bribed into turning their back on Sidious, and this inability to control them was one of the most devastating aspects of Vader's relationship with these guards. On top of this, the fact that he never got a moment of privacy without the Imperial guards watching him was incredibly frustrating. Even when he didn't have any ill intent or desire to formulate a plan to overthrow Palpatine, the Red Royal guards were there as a threat. So to answer the question simply, the guards were loyal to Palpatine, not Vader. Vader could do nothing to influence this. Even when they were there to protect him, they would not listen to him and would put the Emperor's goals above his own. Not to mention that Darth Vader knew the true intent and true purpose why these Red Royal guards were always present. And as stated earlier, this was a threat and Vader knew it, even though he would never say it. But anyway, friends and students of the Force, this is the real reason why Darth Vader hated the Red Royal Guards so intensely, and why anytime they were around, it simply infuriated him. But anyway, my friends, leave your thoughts on this down below. What are your thoughts on Darth Vader's hatred for the Red Royal Guards? And do you think his hatred was justified? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the video. May the Force be with you, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.